This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everybody, to the April meeting of the Arlington County Senior Democrats. And we're so glad you're here. But before we start, I just want to put in a brief plug for the school board endorsement process. We're going to have in-person voting on May 4th at Washington and Liberty High School and May 10th at the Carver models. I'm sorry, Drew Middle School, Drew Grade School, and then in between, and this is the way most people are voting these days. We are going to have online voting using a program called Election Buddy. But to make sure that those of you who want to vote by Election Buddy can do so smoothly, we're asking you to pre-register. And I included in the email that went out yesterday a link that will take you to our registration form. We will then check you against the list of registered voters and send you a Election Buddy link that is unique to you. And if this all sounds very pliable in terms of making sure we only have one person, one vote, I can assure you that once again this year I'm serving as chair of the teller committee, and we double check everything and disprove any duplicate voting and so on. So I would really urge you to vote. You probably want to vote online, although you don't have to, because we do have long hours at both Washington, Liberty, and Drew Model School. So that is the main political announcement. We will meet again on the second Tuesday of the month of May. That's our next meeting. And it's now my great pleasure to call up Sean Epstein, who comes to us by way of being an activist in Florida. He is running for the first delegate district in the House of Delegates of Virginia, which happens to be the district that the incumbent is Patrick Hope. But there are three candidates running for that position, and he's one of them. And we welcome all of our candidates and give them our enthusiastic welcome. He's running a wide variety of issues, which he can explain to you in person. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sean. I want you to sit right here and the sort of like Zoom.
We got the best seats.
Well, maybe. Hey, folks. Appreciate the time. So I'm Sean Epstein. Just to clarify a few things. So I grew up in South Florida in the 70s and 80s. At that time, my parents were very politically active in the Democratic Party. And albeit I like to say I did a lot of things, I probably created more of a mess and were probably more difficult to corral and more often around during cocktail parties and things that my parents probably didn't want me at. But I had the good fortune of working with folks like Governor Bob Graham, who went on to become a senator, Blue Dog Democrat, go Blue Dogs. Also spent some time working on the Dukakis campaign, and then at the age of 18, moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, went to the University of Virginia, and worked on the Clinton campaign as well. I was a Jefferson Scholar. I was also a member of the Jefferson Society in debate, and spent a lot of time working with Larry Sabato and Ken Thompson and others, learning the craft of political science. But without a tremendous amount of duress, I was a Democrat, right? I had grown up a Democrat. I had been a Democrat, had been active as a Democrat. And over the last couple of decades, I've moved to Arlington, Virginia, 2004 with my wife, and actually lived in Douglas Park, just up the road here. We had 3 kids, almost lost 2 of them down this giant hill. Not me, but I'll blame it on Teresa. It was a little bit of a stroller mistake. But this was our stomping ground, and our two dogs would play at this park all the time, going back and forth, which, by the way, helped get the children to sleep. And then we could wander back home and have a couple of minutes of time. We, about 15, 16 years ago, moved up to North Arlington. And so I now live in a neighborhood called Donaldson Run or Dover Crystal, right off of Lorcum and Nellie Custis. From a business perspective, during that time, I have done a lot and gone a lot of different places. I left UVA having worked in the music business for a famous rock and roll band. Moved to San Francisco and thought I would stay in the music business, but since I didn't come from much, when I got offered a job that paid 3 times more in the technology world, I took it. Right? That was what I had to do. And since that time, I've lived in Tokyo, I've lived in Bristol, England, I've lived in New York City, as well as San Francisco, and then finally, as I mentioned, settled back here. I have not been in politics over the last decade or so, partly because I have a wife who was once a nurse and is now a lawyer, and we had 3 kids in 16 months. So I prioritized staying married. Yes, twins were involved. There was no miraculous conception. Yeah, so we're going to keep this G-rated. Yeah, that's how that worked out. But I looked around over the last couple of years, and I've been very, very disappointed in where our party politics have gotten to. The vitriol, the fact that I couldn't let my children watch the first Trump campaign because the words that were being said and the things that were being alluded to were disgusting and graphic and just not what a statesman should be like. And I really said to myself, I have got a tremendous amount of passion for this country. I've got a tremendous amount of passion for the Democratic Party. And I'd like to figure out some common sense solutions for us to move forward. Because as a blue dog Democrat, I know that on the other side, there are a ton of people who are really disappointed Donald Trump is their president and they're Republicans. There's a lot of people who are in the middle who are independents who are really disappointed that Donald Trump is their president. And as Democrats, I certainly hope we're all pretty disappointed that Donald Trump is our president. But I don't think that getting out of this mess means stooping to their level. Right? I think Michelle said it best. When they go low, we go high. And we got to stick to that. Because if we are going to turn on the next generation of Democrats and let them believe that vitriol on both sides is an appropriate thing, that offensive ad hominem attacks are the way to move forward, I don't see our party or any of the other parties succeeding in the long term. And frankly, I'm about America. I would prefer it succeed in the long term. And so my party politics as they relate to the community of folks that are vibrant over the age of 65 or under the age of 65, all come to a few different, what I would consider to be notions. One is I really do believe in people over party. Now, it's a hard time to say that, and I'll accept that. That's a real hard place to be if you're me, right? Everyone wants to just say no to the other side, regardless of what side you're on, and I don't think that's going to get us anywhere. I think sometimes we have to accept that there are great solutions that are incremental, not exponential. And we need to be satisfied with a little bit of progress versus no progress or moving backwards. That's part to my second point, which is I do believe in practical solutions. I think when you look at, as an example, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, let's look at some of the basic facts. We're living longer. Does the age in the future need to change of when you can actually get Social Security benefits and when you can max out your benefits? I think the answer is yes. Are we going to need to take more out of payroll taxes? I think the answer is probably going to be yes. And then we have to think about the way we revise the benefits of A, B, C, and D in our programs. I think the answer has to be yes. And I don't like to say this. I would love to say, hey, we've got a surplus of $2 trillion. Oh, and by the way, our interest payments aren't greater than that of the defense budget, but they are. So something is unsustainable and something will need to change. And then lastly, I think about things like people over party. I think about things like practical solutions. And then I think about what I like to call principled prosperity. And in Arlington specifically, I think we do a fantastic job of helping out businesses like Amazon, which, oh, by the way, seem to be doing fine, minus the market correction or whatever you want to call it, volatility over the last little bit. But when you go and you talk to business owners at Busboy and Poets or the Italian store or Eco Cleaners, all of which I frequent a ton, I don't see that same leaning in of Arlington County that makes them believe that they are actually seeing effort from us and they have an obligation to provide effort back to us. Do all small and medium-sized businesses in Arlington County have to provide internships and mentorship to students in our high schools so they can be prepared to do real jobs? No, they don't. They ought to be. Well, they need to feel like there's something they're getting out of it. That's my basic platform, right? When we think about some of the issues today, Medicaid being a program that Virginia has significant control over, and I'm just putting this in the context of the role I'm trying to run for. I'm running for state delegate. I cannot solve for local county politics, and I can't solve for federal policy. And anyone who says they can running for this is absolutely wrong. It's not how it works. Within the context of the state, we do have to remember that we are the blue part of the state in what many consider in Richmond a red state. So we're a bunch of rich, educated people in the north who keep them from having a red state. That's literally how it's thought about in Richmond all of the time. It really is. So when our House delegates and senators talk about passing lots of bills, how many of them actually get to Arlington? Very, very few, regardless of the administration. Medicaid, though, is an area where the states have the right to administer. The states have the right to define actual benefit packages that you'll receive reimbursement, and also the ability to go out and negotiate on our behalf. I think when it comes to Medicaid and Medicare, there are probably three key things that we can do. The first thing I think that I would say it's four things really. The first thing I think that we can do is probably reduce the administrative burden by putting in better technology and processes. We do not move fast in those systems. Anyone who's been on the phone, like my mother, right? She's handicapped, 78 years old, doesn't have a leg, does just fine otherwise. She spends a ton of time trying to call and find out, doesn't have a huge income, what in the world she's got as benefits. Can she get a new wheelchair? Can she get a new leg? Right? That's hours and hours and hours of time spent on the phone. I think we can do a better job. The second is I think we can do a better job negotiating drug prices. We certainly can lean into that. And both the federal government and the state government can work together to work that out. I think the third thing that we can do, and it applies to some, but I think in many ways all, is preventative care. We've got to do a better job of not getting people to catastrophic needs, but being able to attend to them early on in whatever condition it is. If it's obesity linked to diabetes and high blood pressure, which I know my mom has dealt with, then we need to be working on how we can help her deal with her health condition today so that not through a whole bunch of drugs, but through leveling out her blood sugar, she can bring down her blood pressure, et cetera. So I think we can do a better job there as well. I actually think those are probably the three key ones. I think there's a million more you can get into at a policy level, but that's where I think the state can play a role in helping from a Medicaid and Medicare perspective specifically. That's it. And
Okay, so we are famous for our questioning. I get to ask the first question and then we'll circle around.
do you want to read it in here or do you want me to say it out loud after you say it? Okay.
Based on the Senate budget bill that just passed, it does look as though there's probably going to be an $800 million reduction in the energy and commerce fee, which will probably have to come out of Medicaid. So everybody expects massive cuts in Medicaid, assuming that that's what ultimately comes out of Congress. What would you do to make up that gap? Assuming hypothetically that Congress cut Medicaid, federal funding of Medicaid severely, what would you do as a legislator to make up that gap? That's my question.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing the question right, and to repeat it for those, thank you by the way for joining online. budget cuts being made at a federal level to what the federal government will supplement the states' Medicaid programs and capabilities to, right? If that were to occur, which it looks like it's very possible to occur, how do you deal with that? No one likes the answer. So I'll just preface it that way. But I think at the end of the day, you're going to have to adjust eligibility, you're going to have to raise taxes, and you're going to have to adjust benefits. And no one wants to hear it. I get it, right? You've paid into a system, you've been working for a long time. But I think at the end of the day, for us to build a sustainable Medicaid program at the state level now and frankly into the future for your grandchildren and their children, then we're going to have to look at refining some of those things. I personally am not in favor of downgrading services, but I do believe it's very likely that you need to raise some income, and that comes out of payroll checks, and that comes out of deviating or moving some of the funding for other programs at the state level towards Medicaid. It's a combination if you're going to be sustainable.
Steve, did you have a question?
Well, I was, you didn't really, but you just brought up something that, first of all, what was your major down in Charlottesville where I was?
I was poli-sci.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually Eccles to start, so I did poli-sci, history, and philosophy, and then my entirety of the discourse was around how unwritten and written legal constitutions have influenced morality and government evolution in each of the countries. I think she's much smarter. She's probably a lot smarter than me, but yeah.
Yeah. When you say really cut, is that like you start with the uber rich or like anything like you could emphasize that to start with because that's let's see and they're trying to make it worse. Steal $2 trillion and give each millionaire a $1 million tax cut. But what do you mean by raise tax?
Yeah, so just to repeat into the, for those that are online, the question is, I have suggested that we need to increase revenue to pay for potential shortfalls in Medicaid. And if you think about it, the easiest place to raise revenue from at a state level is from taxes. And the question, if I got it right, was how do you raise those taxes? Does everyone pay $1 more, or do rich people pay $1.50 and poorer people pay 50 cents? Right? I think somewhere there is where Steve is going with the question. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things here, right? One is I think it's really important to check out Freakonomics, which is a podcast. Recently had a phenomenal economist on it who broke down 10 myths about tax and spend economies. So I do want it to be clear that quote unquote rich people, meaning the top 1%, do pay 44% of all the taxes, that the middle pay 23% of the taxes, and the rest don't pay anything. So the idea that the rich don't pay anything is absolutely not true. But that said, they do have the means to be able to pay it more likely within the context of what their affordability is, meaning how much they have made and how much they have to spend and what's left over, right? As a guy who paid my way through school, I'm very aware of that. I think you do have to raise taxes, and to be honest, I think you have to raise it on upper income levels primarily, but everyone's going to have to pay, quote unquote, their fair share. I think everyone's going to get more taxes. I would suggest that the rich, from a proportional perspective, are going to, quote unquote, rich are going to pay for more.
One other quick recommendation. If you ever get cannabis legalized in the state, finally, to get a good bit of tax on that.
So Steve is saying something that I'll address in two ways. One is, Steve's suggesting that not because he's a chemist or loves them, but he is suggesting that we legalize cannabis and use the revenue from cannabis in order to fund some of the gaps in Medicaid. I'll be extremely clear. I am 100% in favor of legalizing cannabis and using some of that revenue to take care of gaps in Medicaid and other things. We've seen it effective in other states. I think it needs to be it needs to be properly regulated. I have 3 kids, right? It needs to be regulated, right? Frankly, I wouldn't have a problem with putting higher taxes on cigarettes. And I don't even know what happens in all these vape stores. At least in my neighborhood, there's a vape store on like every block, which is driving me crazy. Are they paying nearly enough? I would say continue. I mean, they used to call it the sin taxes. Now I'm going to piss off my friends who drink. I don't, but I think you should be paying more taxes on alcohol, you should be paying more taxes on cigarettes, you should be paying taxes on cannabis. They should all be legalized and regulated. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. So the last thing Steve was saying was that that we would have had legalized cannabis if it wasn't for Glenn Youngkin, and I think him and lots of other people on the other side would be the reasons or barriers for that not happening. Again, it needs to be done right though, because what I'm seeing in New York, I don't really approve of either, and what I see in California, I don't.
Well, if I could comment on his earlier point, we have something here in Virginia called federal informatives, which is where just to keep the paperwork, the federal definition of income and all the nuances of the federal income tax, Virginia just adopts it's the same because nations of calculation to compute it. So a lot of questions about how you can change income, you have to go away from the. You could certainly raise the rates, but it's giving up a lot if you started defining income differently than the government.
So I'm a flat tax guy. I think all of the tax system right now is crap. I think we should just have a flat tax. It's one rate, and boom. My uncle was a Republican who ran a giant accounting firm in Ohio. Their entire family was part of the long-time old Youngstown crowd. But he was actually a Republican primarily because whenever Democrats won, he got a lot of business for his accounting firm, trying to figure out all the loopholes that they could follow. I actually think we should simplify the tax code, get rid of all these loopholes, call it a day with a flat tax. If you don't make a certain amount, that's it. And then because here's the deal: the rich aren't getting away with paying no taxes because the rich are like filing a different system. They're filing in the same system, but they pay a lot of money to accountants. And the reason they pay a lot of money to accountants is to get a huge tax break, period. And if you just said it's 10% or whatever it is, and so here's the deal: I'm an economist, right? So at the end of it, I need X billions or X trillions of dollars in revenue. I have this many people. This is how I'm going to get to that number, period. And then you'll have an effective tax rate that makes a heck of a lot more sense, a simplified tax code. And then instead of DOJA just cutting all these people, we can actually talk about getting processes done. Filing returns can be easy. Getting refunds can be easy as well. I just think that that's a major, it's a major obstacle for us to play with the current tax code, which no one has actually read or will.
Does anyone else have a question for Sean? No. Okay. Well, is there any questions online you might want to just ask?
Hey folks, thank you for having it muted. If anyone has a question online, I'm happy to take it.
Well, so why don't you give us a 2-minute closing argument, including your website and how people can get in touch with you, get more information.
Well, June needs time, so I'll go in 30 seconds. I have pieces of paper up there that have all the information on my campaign, a QR code, which provides a link to my website, to donate, to join me on social, whatever you would prefer. I'll stay here as long as you guys want to answer questions. You know, I have a mom. I'm part of the sandwich generation. I'm taking care of an elderly mother, and I'm taking care of 3 young kids. And that isn't easy. I see and deal with every one of my mother's issues that a lot of you deal with every single day because I'm the one helping her deal with it. You know, I go down to Florida once every couple months, spend time going to doctor's appointment after doctor's appointment, dealing with insurance company after insurance company, finding out if the place that she's in with other seniors is safe and clean and all that. So I feel that pain, and I appreciate the time today. So that would be that.
And
Thank you all.
uh, Craig,
I'm going to turn this over to June now. I got it.
right. Why don't you just go ahead and fully. No need for me to introduce you. You're obviously introduced in the way. Well, let's this is Krakash. She is the head of the Arlington Education Association. She's been very active in Arlington for a number of years, and I'm sure she'll give you a much more detailed biography. And she's one of 2 candidates in the school board endorsement process that we'll have in May.
Thank you. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm June Prakash, 23-year resident of Arlington. I have a child who has been through elementary school, middle school, and is now at Washington Liberty High School. So our family has experienced the different levels of APS education. Running for school board is one of those things that in 2016 I knew I was going to do. It just was a matter of time when I was going to do it. And so I've spent the last almost 10 years really immersing myself in Arlington Public Schools. So started out as a substitute teacher at Ashlon and was with 5th graders for a while, and then worked with kindergartners, all levels, volunteered like crazy, was PTA president. And then this opportunity came up to run for president of our educators union. So it was an interesting way to still advocate for students with more of like a long time legacy results rather than, you know, obviously it being in the schools, there's legacy results with the children, it's long lasting, but this was a different way to also advocate for the educators in Arlington. So we can't have talented teachers, or we can't have a great public school system and really well educated kids if we don't have the talent that will stay here as well. So I was thinking today about, well, why does a school board candidate, why does that matter to this group in particular, right? Probably, I'm going to make an assumption that if you had kids in Arlington Public Schools, they've probably already transitioned out. So why does it matter? And so some of the things I was thinking about, and I am going to read off some notes, so I apologize for that, but intergenerational programs. So I think Arlington seniors, you still matter. You still can be a part of the school system. So implementing initiatives that foster interactions between students and seniors can really enrich the experience and promote community cohesion. So collaborations with outside groups, maybe Arlington Commission on Aging could facilitate such programs. There's still a lot to offer as a senior, right? I don't know if anybody in the room or online knows, but Arlington Public Schools does offer adult education programs. Some of those are 55 plus. So maybe getting more messaging out about that, about those programs. I took French through there. I can't speak French for anything, but it was a really great experience nonetheless. School safety and accessibility. So making sure that the schools are still accessible and safe for community events would be important. So that would be something that would be on my mind. And again, what goes with that is community use of school facilities. So making sure that you know that schools are available for community events, cultural events, recreational activities, and the like. And then also recognizing that there is a population of Arlington Public School students that are cared for by their grandparents. So making sure that that's not forgotten in the conversations about academics and policy and whatnot. And then making sure that we are protecting the benefits of Arlington Public School employees that are now retirees. So about a year and a half ago, APS pivoted suddenly on healthcare. And it was a really big deal. The messaging wasn't good, and especially for seniors because they had a different group of healthcare options, there was very little communication that got out, and it was very confusing and it was very stressful. So just keeping in mind that seniors still do matter, even though their kids might not be in the schools anymore, but there is a place for you there. And if you ever want to volunteer, we have all those kinds of opportunities. But the big thing too is that as long as politicians are involved in making decisions about educators, educators should be involved in politics. So I didn't get in education because I wanted to be a politician, but I think now more than ever, we need that educator voice on the school board. When we won collective bargaining and we're trying to get contracts for educators the first time in 40 years, 47 years in Arlington, our tagline was no decisions about us without us. And that remains true. I don't think that you would want your physician or decisions about your medical health being made by a layperson, a la RFK Jr. And such. And so running on good intentions right now it's just not enough. So you need someone who's going to make decisions based on community input, based on experience, based on data. And that's going to be really important right now. Our students are facing potentially devastating cuts with this administration, and so are our staff. And you need someone in there who knows what to do. So that's my why. That's why I'm running. I prefer talking with you, not at you. So I actually like this really small format. So fire away.
I'll ask the first question.
Yeah.
Answer some of the question I asked Sean. Just a few days ago, the Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, sent out a note to all the school districts in America saying, you have 10 days to come back and certify that you sort of purge all of your DEI programs, that you're a DEI-free organization, whatever that is. And some people have already come back, like New York State has come back and said, no, we're not going to do that. I would like to know if you were on the school board today, rather than 6 months from now, what would you do in a situation like that?
So it definitely puts us in a pinch because we're worried about funding being cut off if we don't comply. But I would like to do as much as possible to say no to that, because as a school board member and Arlington Public Schools, they've done a really good job so far of being diverse and equitable and inclusive. And our schools should reflect the values of our community. And I think our community values what encompasses DEI. So I will hold on as long as possible. I will not vote yes to get rid of that stuff, but I do understand that there might come a point where we have no other option, and that's really sad and it's really, really scary.
Well, what percent of the Arlington school board budget
From federal, not a big percentage, actually. It's only 3 point something%. So we get most of our money. It's not that much. I think what worries us is that right now we have 160.4 grant funded positions, and we're worried about that going away because these are not just kind of the extra positions. These are positions that are dealing with kids who have autism, for special ed, for English language learners. So that is really troubling. And
Those are
right. And so what's scary too is that this threatens school meal programs, right? So breakfast and lunch for kids, that's might be their only nourishment that they get that day. So when you have to make a choice between, do we want to feed these kids? That is going to be a really difficult position to be in for the school system, but I will not vote to absolve that.
Well, the real problem is sort of definition. It's a sincere problem for everybody, regardless of the viewpoint. For example, as I understand it, one of the controversial practices is whether you measure the disparity in discipline between minority students and non-minority students. And the disparity of outcome then drives the conduct process.
Mhm.
And that is the type of thing that they define as DEI, as opposed to the things that some other people might define, like make all English language learners feel welcome in the
Right.
community.
Yeah.
So it gets to
Right.
be hyper technical.
Yeah, yeah. The definitions can be a little bit open to interpretation. I definitely agree with that. But the fact is that it is a public education system for all students, and we have to protect that at all costs. So it doesn't mean just the ones that look like this or speak like this. It means all.
Someone else have a question? Please go ahead, Karen.
So I want to ask about the budget.
Okay.
Like spring flowers every year, the school board has to deal with a budget. And you did mention that they brought in an expert this year.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you had another approach, which you would be interested in using, and I'd like to hear more about that.
Yeah, so for the past 3 years at least, I'm a member of the 400 Club, which means I've read the budget book from, yeah, I'm real fun at parties, from cover to cover. So the benefit in doing that is you realize kind of the trends that come. In terms of budget, I think that people in the school board try their best, right? I don't have bad things to say about the current school board members or my predecessors. I think they are doing the best that they can with what they have. And the thing about our budget right now is that we're given a huge chunk of money from the county, and we're told to make it work within the constraints of that. And it doesn't always work. So we're not really able to make a needs-based budget. And the fact is that our needs are outpacing what we're being given money-wise. So we always just need to be looking at, is the budget reflecting our values as a school system? Is the maximum amount of money actually going to the students? There's a line in the budget that says that our students get on average something like $25,000, but is that truly going to each student, or is there something else embedded in that? So getting that, making sure that we're not paying out of the one-time fee bucket for ongoing projects and things like that, and making sure that we're addressing buildings that are crumbling. So right now, unfortunately, we've gone into this cycle of, especially with our buildings, that we have buildings that are really falling apart, that have antiquated heating systems, et cetera. And we're always patching the holes in these buildings, and we're not on any sort of maintenance. And I think I said this to you yesterday, is that in Arlington County, for instance, your street probably gets paved every few years, whether it looks bad or not, right? So they're on some sort of a system, and we've lost our way with that. So we spend a lot of time and a lot of resources patching the holes in our buildings, and that's something that has to change. So there are a lot of things we can continue to look at. I think budget is always going to be a hot topic, right? Because those are your tax dollars, but I think we're heading in the right direction in terms of how we're assessing the budget. I think what is distressing are always going to be staff cuts and things like that. But I don't know if you heard the forum. I did say cut stuff, not staff, which I just want to be clear, because Arlington Now said that was a union tagline, and it was not. That was a shout out to our ITCs. But I really think that's one thing, is that looking at waste and cutting stuff versus cutting staff should always be one of the first things that we look at.
What do you think about personal computing devices? Is that stuff, staff, or not cuttable?
I think it's cuttable. So I think pre-pandemic, for instance, in a kindergarten classroom, we had a set of 8 iPads. And I do understand why every kid was given their own device during pandemic, because equity, we always hear that word equity. We want to make it equitable for kids. But I don't think we need it. I think it's a distraction. I think a class set is just fine for the younger kids, and next year they're going to not have it in the lower grades. And I do think that there's some benefit, like technology is a thing, right? And kids should know how to type and use technology, but we also have the responsibility to have them use it wisely. But I think, having said that, we also need kids that can come out of school being able to write, being able to hold a pen and write things and write it in cursive And I do think
Yes.
there's a connection between what happens with your memory and in your brain and actually writing things down. So I would love to see a return to that and not using technology as a fill-in measure, but something that really truly enhances the educational experience. Because I do think that, like with AI, for instance, in some cases that could enhance things, but that's a whole completely different topic that we could get on. But yeah.
Steve?
You were a representative, and what was your very beginning? Were you an aide? Teacher?
So I started out, I career switched. So I started out as a substitute teacher, then went into long term, and then got a permanent position at Ashland. So yeah, I was an instructional aide. I was working on my second master's degree in education, and then pandemic, and so got a couple classes left with that. Maybe we'll just jump to PhD. I'm not really sure, but yeah. So I'm very careful about always saying educator rather than teacher because I don't want to misrepresent what I was doing in the buildings. Yeah, in the pool, yes. In the thick of things, have taught children to read, have, been there, wiped tears, have encouraged them, taught them how to do persuasive arguments. So I've done a lot of it, but I'm very careful not to say that I was a teacher because that implies that I had a license.
Substitute teacher. Education.
Oh, well, you don't need that anymore. Yeah. You can come and sub in Arlington. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're much more open. I'll make a note of that. Yeah. Yeah, anyone who wants to sub, just, it would be a great thing for community members to do if they're willing to give.
Yeah.
And all you really need to do is, I think, 2 or 3 hour time slots a month. So it's a great gig. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? You might want to ask the screen.
Green. So caller 1 or Mark Teal, do you have any questions for me? Nobody's coming off mute, and I don't see anything in the chat. Yeah.
Chronic absenteeism.
Yes.
It's a serious problem in our school.
Yes.
Across the country. And at the end of the last school year, the school board said that one of their priorities was to reduce chronic absenteeism numbers.
Yep.
And there was a report, I believe in February,
Mm-hmm.
that basically indicated there was very little change from last year to this year. And so here's my question. What steps do you think, it's one thing to say it's your priority,
Mm-hmm.
that's great, but if you don't take the steps to fulfill that obligation somehow, so
Yeah.
that you're fulfilling that need, what would you recommend
Yeah.
that, say, the attendance office personnel should be doing that presently they may not be doing?
Yeah, so the question was about chronic
Question.
absenteeism. Yeah, and kind of how all that works. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and I'll land the plane and get to your answer. But yes, it's an issue. I think the latest report said that right now APS was at 13% chronic absenteeism. That was before January, so that was before the new administration took place. Their goals and objectives is to get that number down to 8%. So what's complicating that right now is folks are worried about kids who might have immigrant status. And we can't track that because we don't ask about immigrant status. So we're, I think, unofficially looking and seeing if that's trending, but we're not going to be able to officially have data about that. So I think we need to find out why. Why are kids absent? Is it because they saw ICE in their neighborhood and they're scared to come to school? That is a real thing right now. There have been ICE raids in Arlington that have been documented, right? So we need to know about that. Are they truly sick? Are they following the guidelines that, from COVID? Like, if you're sick, please stay home. Are they actually doing that? Is there something else going on? Is school too much for some kids? I will admit that I let my son stay home sometimes when he's like, Mom, I just need a break. Because I feel like at 16 years old, if he needs a break, I believe him. He's not going out and, going all over town. He is literally taking a mental health break. So I think understanding the whys behind that and having that conversation with community members and seeing if there's anything we can do to support um, folks coming to school on the regular and understanding what is being missed when you are not at school.
Excuse me, home visits.
That is a possibility.
Record
Yeah.
of those visits and what we discovered and what the solution was.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. So most schools at least have a part-time parent liaison. So I think if there does start to be a problem with absenteeism, that person is called in and trying to figure out like what's going on, how can we get this child back to school? So some of those conversations are taking place. I don't have any data on how many of those visits happen every year, but I think that's an interesting point to bring up. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned the ice raids. I had only heard about it anecdotally from a neighbor. Can you just get me straight on the facts?
So I know that there was one in the Barcroft neighborhood for sure. That was the day that Ice Barbie was there in her makeup in the news. Sorry, I just don't want to name her by name, but it felt like a stunt. But I think people are definitely worried about it, and the thing that we are trying to do as a school system, because this has been a conversation that I have had with administration even before the election, was what are we going to do just in case, right? And so what we did is we adopted a school safe resolution. So that prompted APS to have a memo of understanding with the police department so that if ICE comes, they have to show the right kind of warrant. And it's not on the teacher or even the principal to look at that warrant and say, oh yeah, this is exactly right. This is why we have attorneys in APS. So they need to come, they need to validate it. We have been working with parents for, again, worst possible case scenario, like who takes my kids if I'm not home or I'm not at the bus stop. So those conversations are happening. And I hate that for our kids. I hate any kid or staff member feeling like, is today going to be the day? And as we've seen in the national news, it doesn't even matter if you are legal or illegal. Like you can get picked up and be taken. So it's really scary times, but the conversations are happening and continue to happen.
Good.
Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Anything else? Okay, well, could you just summarize for a couple of minutes and tell us your website and so?
Yeah, it's a couple minutes, but I think I said a lot of what I needed to say. Just want to reiterate that my decisions will not be faith-based decisions. They will be based on experience. They will be based on data. They'll be based on community input. And that community input, I will let you know how that input was used. So you're not just thinking you're giving input and that the school board never takes consideration of that. It is not enough to run on good intention right now. You have to have an educator making decisions about educators. You have to have that knowledge on the school board right now. We know what happens when the most qualified candidate doesn't win. And I don't want to be sitting here a year from now saying, you guys, you had an opportunity. So I need you to be a voter. I need you to vote in May at Washington Liberty on May 4th or Drew Elementary School on May 10th or online. And my website is www.friendsofjune.com. And hopefully you've seen my signs in the median. There's a lot of them out there. But yeah, feel free to look at my website. You can always contact me and if you have more questions, but be a voter. Thank you.
All right, so you've heard from two very fine candidates. Again, both of them are running in contested elections, and I'm sure you'll consider all of the candidates for each of the positions. We will adjourn until the second Tuesday of May. Thank you again for joining us.